от Совета министров СССР. На Чернобыльской атомной электростанции произошла авария. Поврежден один из атомных реакторов. Принимаются меры по ликвидации последствий аварии. Пострадавшим оказывается помощь. Создана правительственная комиссия.
Construction of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant began in 1970, and the plant's first reactor went online in 1977. This facility was built during the Soviet era near the town of Pripyat in northern Ukraine and operated with a total of 4 reactors. Pripyat, located about 100 kilometers north of Ukraine's capital Kyiv, was constructed to house the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor and their families. Chernobyl, one of the Soviet Union's most prestigious engineering projects, provided energy to millions of homes with its approximately 4,000 megawatt capacity. However, during a safety test in 1986, this grand project turned into a catastrophe. On April 26, 1986, the people in Pripyat and surrounding areas were going about their daily lives, unaware of the disaster awaiting them. While most were planning their day, heading to work, school, or shopping, a safety test at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant was about to lead to the world's worst nuclear accident. Around 1 a.m., during the safety test, the reactor's power had been reduced to 200 megawatts. Engineer Alexander Akimov repeatedly warned his supervisor, Anatoly Dyatlov, that the power should not drop below 700 megawatts, but Dyatlov ignored him and continued the test. Due to several operator errors and design flaws in the reactor, the subsequent events would lead to the destruction of a city and pose a significant threat to several countries. The RBMK, Reactor Bolshoi Moshchnosti Kanalny, reactors used at Chernobyl, which are graphite moderated and use boiling water, become unstable and difficult to control when operated at low power. Despite all warnings and this knowledge, the safety test proceeded disastrously. At 1:23 a.m., the reactor's power suddenly surged to 120 times its normal level, and the temperature rose to 4,500 degrees Celsius. A panicked engineer entered the control room and reported that the control rods, each weighing approximately 350 kilograms, had been ejected. After these negative developments, Akimov attempted to shut down the reactor completely by pressing the emergency stop button, but this action further increased the reactor's temperature and pressure. The safety test continued to bring about all the adverse effects, and the 1,000-ton lid on top of the reactor was blown off by a massive explosion. The removal of the lid allowed oxygen to enter, which reacted with the hydrogen in the reactor and caused a second, much larger explosion. This explosion released a significant amount of radioactive material into the atmosphere, leading to an environmental disaster. The radiation level was so high that it released 400 times more radiation than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in a very short time. The reason for the extensive radiation release after the accident was that while an atomic bomb contains about 60 kilograms of uranium, the Chernobyl reactor contained about 30 tons of uranium. The primary cause of damage in the Chernobyl disaster was not the shockwave from the explosions, but the spread of radioactive materials. These substances entered drinking water and agricultural products through rain and wind, increasing cancer risk by entering the bodies of people in different regions. Shortly after the explosion, teams arrived at the scene to extinguish the fire. During this time, a substantial amount of radiation was being emitted along with the fire, and the teams were very close to the reactor. As a result, the team members who intervened in the fire sadly died within a few weeks due to intense radiation exposure. The radiation level they were exposed to was equivalent to undergoing almost 1 million X-ray scans. Some residents of Pripyat watched the fire and the bright lights caused by radiation from a bridge in the city that night. This light was radiation ionizing the air. Unknowingly making a grave mistake, everyone who watched the events of that night at Chernobyl from the bridge was exposed to very high levels of radiation. Unfortunately, everyone on the bridge that night died within a few years due to cancer and various illnesses. After the incidents, the bridge was named the Bridge of Death. So what is radiation, and why is it so harmful to human health? Radiation is the emission of high-energy rays and particles from the nuclei of radioactive atoms. One of the most harmful types of these rays is gamma radiation. Thick concrete walls or lead-covered structures are required to stop gamma rays. Gamma rays can easily pass through the human body and damage DNA. This damage can lead to mutations at the cellular level, causing cancer. After the explosion, because the fire in the reactor was too large to be extinguished with water and the temperature was very high, about 2,000 helicopters were used to drop sand, boron, and lead on the reactor to bring the fire under control. These materials helped extinguish the fire and reduce the spread of radiation. Although an emergency evacuation was necessary after the explosion, people began to be evacuated from the city about 36 hours later. Residents around Chernobyl were evacuated from their homes, being told it would be temporary. However, this optimistic view never materialized, and 350,000 people never returned to their homes. All domestic and wild animals in the area were culled and buried to prevent the spread of radioactive contamination. A few months after the explosion, the reactor was covered with 300,000 tons of concrete and 6,000 tons of steel. This structure was called the sarcophagus, or tomb. Since the sarcophagus has reached the end of its lifespan, the new safe confinement project was initiated and completed in 2016, covering the existing sarcophagus. This new structure, measuring 108 meters high, 162 meters long, and 257 meters wide, completely encapsulates the reactor and the old sarcophagus, aiming to prevent radioactive leakage more securely. This structure is one of the world's largest movable structures and is designed to prevent radioactive leakage from the old sarcophagus. Additionally, it provides the necessary infrastructure to safely dismantle and remove the reactor remnants. Today, there is no regular habitation in and around Chernobyl. However, there are some exceptions and special circumstances. The 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant is closed to human settlement. Entry to this area is tightly controlled and generally allowed only with official permission. Due to the high levels of radioactive contamination still present in the area, permanent residence is unsafe. However, some former residents, particularly elderly people, have returned to the exclusion zone to live self-sufficient lives. These individuals typically live in small villages in the area, and their numbers are quite small. Apart from these people, controlled tourist visits to the exclusion zone are organized. During these tours, tourists can see certain areas with guides and safety precautions. Outside of these small tours, the city of Pripyat has turned into a complete ghost town and no one lives there.